Welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so as you can see from the title page, time for a bit of divergence on the show, and it's been long overdue, but we're doing a Mezcal episode of the show, and it's been several years since I've done one, and as I've often said, the Goodrum Show is not purely about whiskey. The Goodrum Show is about all spirits, and yet to find a spirit really that I don't particularly like. I mean, there are some that I prefer more than others, and some that I understand more than others, shall we say. And straight off the bat, I don't profess to be anywhere near an expert in the field of Mezcal. And why am I doing an episode of the show on Mezcal? Well, it's apparently the next big thing. It's not rum. Rum is not going to be the next big thing. It's apparently Mezcal. And I was reading an article in a trade magazine saying, I forget what the percentage that sales are up and all that kind of thing, but a lot of the big boys are now kind of muscling in on the market. I mean, I believe George Clooney has sold his tequila brand to one of the big boys, and I think it's Bacardi, I think, have purchased Patron, which is probably, I would guess, the most well-known tequila brand out there. And but we're not looking at tequila, we're looking at Mezcal, and I think there are probably three reasons why I'm slightly dubious about sort of claiming Mezcal is going to be the next big thing, and those three things are fairly straightforward. Firstly, the level of geekery around Mezcal is just insane. I mean, you know, I know there are whiskey nerds and sort of rum nerds and things like that, but the level of geekery around Mezcal and tequila is just unreal, and I think maybe that puts some people off. I mean, while I was doing the research for this week's episode of the show, I found a really good blog called Mezcal PhD, and one of the guys' posts from a few years back now was basically he was trying to figure out how many varieties of agave they are in Mexico, and he created what he thought was a pretty extensive list, and one of the replies to the post was, well, yes, that's great, but you've not written the names correctly. You're supposed to put genus and then something else after it, and it's supposed to be in italics, and it's like, Jesus Christ, the guy's got all his bloody work, and that's the thanks he gets. And so I think that there's an element of that involved in why Mezcal is not sort of, like I said, going to be the next big thing. The second thing is perception. I think if you ask the majority of the general public to name a spirit from Mexico, I think sort of like 8 times out of 10 they're going to say tequila. And although Mezcal and tequila are very similar, I mean, they're both made from agave, they can be both made in the traditional artisan manner. Where they differ obviously is in the agave they can use, and obviously where they come from. Tequila can only be produced in the region of Jalisco, and can only be made from the Blue Weber varietal of agave, whereas Mezcal, I believe there's over 200 different varieties of agave that could be used, and I think from certainly looking at the list that the chap on Mezcal PhD had created, I think there was about 47 varieties that he discovered have been used or could be used in the production of Mezcal, of which probably less than half in reality are actually used. And the third reason I think that again Mezcal is going to struggle to be the next big thing, again kind of links into the whole perception angle, but it's a kind of hangover from, I guess, the 70s and the 80s, and it's the worm business. And I still get asked in the shop, people come in and say, do you do the tequila with the worm in? You know, it's this whole kind of, I mean, I don't know where this kind of thing came from, and, you know, this belief that if you ate the worm, you'd start, you know, you'd get high, and it's kind of absolutely ridiculous. It was a complete gimmick, and it's, we're almost, what, 40, 50 years down the line from that, and, you know, that perception has just not gone away, and so it's seen, like I said, as a bit of a gimmick. It's the slammers, it's the sort of the salt and the lime, and, you know, it's going to struggle to really get away from that misconception about the whole concept of both tequila and mezcal, but obviously we're talking about mezcal. Where I think mezcal is really interesting is in the fact of it's almost like the ultimate, if you ignore wine for example, terroir driven spirit. I mean, you know, if you take for example Marc Renier and his Rent a Quote, and his banging on and on about terroir in barley and whiskey and now obviously in rum with his building a rum distillery. And the reality is he should have built a tequila distillery or hacienda, because the sheer volume of raw material grown in different locations is staggering, absolutely staggering. And basically, so what you have is with mezcal, you have up until recently, up until this month in actual fact, I believe there was 8 designated DOs or regions where mezcal could be produced. Those are, and now please, foreign words, and I'm going to mangle the pronunciation, I know it, so, you know, bear with me on this one. So you have Oaxaca, which is probably where the vast bulk of mezcal is produced, Guerrero, Durango, Zacatecas, San Luis Potosi, and Puebla, along with Tamaulipas, Michoacan and Guanajuato. Right, so they're the ones, and in August of this year the authorities added 2 new DOs, one called Aqua Salentius and another called Edomix, or Edomix, which means State of Mexico. So I'm guessing that's kind of like an almost catch-all DO for mezcal produced in anywhere else other than those particular regions. And so, like I said, it's a fascinating subject. I mean, it is just full of history. I mean, I think sort of, you know, historically, it pretty much goes back to Aztec times when they were making a rough beer from the agave plant. And, you know, a lot of the farmers and producers are doing things in the traditional way. You know, you look at pictures of how they crush the agave, you know, with what I think it's called a Tahoma wheel. You know, it's a donkey walking around with donkey power. You know, it's absolutely incredible. It really is a fascinating subject. And like I said, I don't pretend to be an expert on mezcal at all, and so today's tasting is really, I suppose, educational for me. Is there a difference between the different varieties of agave? And all of the samples I have here today are different agaves, some in combination and some not, so I think it will be really interesting. And before obviously I introduce the lineup, I would like to say a big thank you to the companies that have given me samples. The first 3 come from a bar in Nottingham called 400 Rabbits, which is purely a tequila bar, and they've now created a sort of a distribution arm called Casa Agave, and I'd just like to say thank you to Jennifer for the samples for those. The Derrumbes samples obviously from speciality brands, so again thank you to them for those samples. And the one that's just arrived literally this week is forgetting the name of it, the Mezcal Union Uno, which I believe is fairly big in the States, but is now sort of looking to sort of like get over here, shall we say, and being distributed by indie brands. And I was speaking to the guy from Mezcal Union, and another interesting thing about the people behind mezcal is the passion they have for not just the spirit, but for the good that farming agave does for the general population. I mean, you think of Mexico and your first thoughts are probably high levels of death from shootings and stabbings and drugs, basically. And what companies like sort of these companies that you know, the brands that own them and things like that, is that, you know, they're basically saying to farmers, look, there's another option. You don't have to sort of grow poppies or weed or whatever it is. You know, you can grow agave and you can sort of make something to be proud of, as opposed to something that makes people, you know, well, you know what drugs do to people. And so it is a really big deal for social, you know, for the social element of things. And I think it really should be supported. You know, anything to sort of move people away from producing you know, drugs to sort of producing something else which is far more beneficial, shall we say. I think has to be applauded. And the other thing about the production is that, unlike sort of like whiskey, which is made from barley, obviously, which grows every year, it doesn't quite work that way with mezcal. I mean, it takes roughly between 4 to 6 years for an agave to actually get to a point where it can be harvested and can be used. And so therefore you need a sustainability with your farming. It's not a case of, right, well, we just grow them, we chop them up and job done. You know, you've got to sort of, you know, plan your farming. And obviously that takes time, money, and although a lot of these agaves grow wild in Mexico, they obviously still need to be farmed and produced and that kind of thing. So I think from those angles, I think tequila and mezcal is a really interesting subject. And I think if you can put away your preconceptions and all the baggage that's associated with it and give it a try, see what you think, I think you'll actually really like it. So anyway, I think that's pretty much enough waffle. I'm not going to go into sort of too much detail about the individual producers. If you want to find that information out, obviously there's links on the information on the below the video on YouTube, so feel free to do so. And I'll also chuck in a link to the Mezcal PhD site, which I think is certainly worth having a look at. So anyway, let's just take a look at today's lineup then, shall we? Right, okay, so loads of different agaves, loads of different ABVs, so I just thought the easiest thing to do is I'm just going to taste them kind of almost like together. So I'm going to kick off with three of the bottlings that are imported and distributed by Casa Agave. The first is called La Medida Espadin and bottled at 40.6%. This comes from the region of Osaka, from an area called Talulula del Matamoros. I probably completely mangled that, but there you go. And as the name suggests, it's made from 100% Espadin agave, which does seem to be the most popular agave varietal that is used in mezcal production. Second bottling again is from La Medida brand, and this is called the Tepeztate, bottled at 47.1%, again from the Osaka region. And this is an interesting one because there's two agaves that are used in this, Marmorata and Tepeztate. So it'll be interesting to see what the difference is between those two particular bottlings. The third bottling we'll be looking at is called the Animas Mezcal Joven Artisanal Papalometi. Great name, what a gobful, you know. And that is bottled at 48%. Again, comes from the region of Osaka, from an area known as Santiago Matalan. Matalan? I think so. And again, a different blend of agaves. This is 70% Espadin and 30% Papalometi. So again, could be quite interesting. Then we're going to move on to the Mezcal Union Uno, which is bottled at 40% now. I believe this is a collaboration, I guess. The spirit is made from both Espadin again and another variety of agave called Cereal, and I don't know quite where its DO is. I don't think it actually states it. It may well do. So apologies if I've got that wrong. But I think this is spirit probably produced by a number of artisanal producers and is then kind of blended together. I think, I'm not 100% certain about that, so if I have got that wrong, I do apologise. But I think, again, like I said, I'm more interested in seeing if there is a different characteristic linked to the different uses of agave plants. So anyway, then we're going to move on to the two Derrumbes bottlings. The first we're going to be looking at is the first one from actually a different region. This is the Zacatecas, or Zacatecas, I think is the pronunciation, bottled at 42%, and obviously from that region. And this is one of the nice things about the Derrumbes range and why I stock them, is because each of the bottlings, and I think there's now 5 in the range, come from the different regions of the different DOs of mezcal production. This particular bottling, like I said, is bottled at 42% and is the only one that is made from 100% Tequiliana Weber Azul, or the blue agave of tequila. And I did read somewhere where, I think again it was on the Mezcal PhD, where he seemed to think that because blue agave was used in tequila, it couldn't be used in mezcal. But he said he thought he wasn't quite correct in saying that, and maybe the letter of the law, in inverted commas, is that, but it obviously is used in mezcal. So so we have that particular one. And the last bottling we'll be looking at is the Derrumbes Durango, from obviously that particular DO, and again a completely different variety of agave. This is made from Cenizo, or it's otherwise known as Genesis. I mean, this is the bizarre thing about all of these bloody names for agave. I mean, they seem to have several names, and it's probably a case of they have a sort of you know, Latin kind of proper name, and then they have all nicknames and God knows what else. But anyway, like I said, this is today's lineup. I think hopefully it's going to be as educational for you lot as it is for me. I mean, we'll just have to see what they're like. So anyway, let's kick off with the first bottling, the La Medida Espadin. Right, okay, so let's see what the nose gives us. I can smell it from here, and actually pretty damn pungent. It's got quite an acetic character, almost sort of verging on the sort of like almost a vinegary note. But the thing that I get most often out of both tequila and mezcal is a sort of a kind of pulped fruit kind of character. I mean, if you kind of like take, you know, some fruit and sort of mash it up, that's the kind of character I kind of get, and a slight sort of woodiness, obviously. There's a bit of smokiness, there's some sweetness, but it has that real sort of, like I said, sort of acetic, astringent kind of character, which is interesting. So I'm guessing that is the sort of the nature of the Espadin agave, to give you that kind of character. But it's got a lovely softness. It's pleasant. It's a bit straightforward, I would say. There's not a huge amount going on other than the aromas that I've just mentioned. But yeah, it's pleasant. Let's see what the palate gives us. Crisp, fresh, quite minerally, certainly on the finish. A bit straightforward. Again, there's a little bit of smoke. There's a little bit of that acetic kind of edgy character. It's got a nice warmth to it. It's got a a pleasant aftertaste. There's a little bit of sweetness there, which kind of just about supplies the balance between that acetic edgy character and the sweetness. So not a bad starter, I think, and certainly so. It's kind of almost, I suppose, the benchmark, I suppose, for the rest of the tasting. So yeah, nice. Okay, so let's move on to the Tepeztate. So this is, like I said, this is two different agave strains, Marmorata and Tepeztate. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Now that's quite different. It's oilier, denser, more herbal. It's got a sort of a richness to it, an almost barley-like richness. I know that sounds probably a bit bizarre, but it has a real fullness to it. Again, a little bit of smoke, a little bit of that sort of slightly acetic notes, but that kind of seems to be quite low down in the sort of the aroma profile. It seems to be more complex. There seems to be a lot more going on, and like I said, it's got a lot more weight to it. And like I said, it's got an almost kind of sort of barley-ish sort of character. I mean, again, there's a little bit of white fruit, a little bit of kind of a little woodiness as well. Yeah, that's an interesting nose, it has to be said. Let's see what the palate's like. Rounded, fuller, getting some vanillins as well, which I'm guessing, as obviously you can see these are all Jovens, there's no oak aging, so that's got to be naturally occurring vanillins within the agave itself. Again, slight acetic note, but right on the finish, but it's all kind of really nicely balanced. There's a richness, a depth, not so much a sweetness. It's got quite a herbal character and a little bit of smoke, just more complexity, more interest, and it's obvious that the combination of these two different agaves, it probably would have been interesting if I could have all individual single agave varietals, but obviously, I kind of have to work with what I've got, and certainly so far I think that's quite an impressive mezcal. So yeah, nice. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Animas, and like I said, this is 70% Espadin and 30% Papalometi. Let's see what nose gives us on this. Ooh, right, so I'm getting the acetic notes, so that is obviously the character of the Espadin agave, but I'm getting quite a savoury character, which I'm guessing must be coming from the Papalometi. It's got again, slight richness, which is sort of being balanced by this acetic kind of astringent, minerally kind of note. It's got quite an earthy character. It feels really, really natural. Not that I'm saying that the other two weren't natural, but this has a real kind of artisanal quality to it. And I must admit, this is so far, I think this is the one that sort of intrigues me the most. Again, there's a little bit of smoke, a little bit of herbal notes, but it's got that edginess, but it's not too edgy. It's just sort of got the edge taken off the edginess, if you see what I mean. Yeah, I like this. I think this is really quite impressive spirit. Let's see what the palate's like. That's got a bit of a kick. Edgy, slightly acetic again, very herbal, slightly smoky, really long. That herbal kind of character just kind of lingers and lingers. There's a little bit of sweetness. It's got quite a woodiness as well, quite drying. That's probably partly down to the alcohol level being at 48%, and that's kind of adding a slight dryness as well to the finish. Quite peppery now. It's got that sort of slightly tequila-y, peppery kind of note right on the aftertaste. Quite earthy again, and it has that artisanal kind of character, which I think is really kind of quite intriguing, and it packs some punch, it has to be said, but wonderfully complex, really very, very good spirit. Okay, so let's move on to the Mezcal Union Uno. So this is Espadin and Cereal. Oh, foreign words. Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Again, it's got an almost whiskey-ish kind of right character. It has a sort of semi-new make whiskey spirit kind of note to it. Again, the Espadin is giving it that slight acetic note, but I'm getting real sweet pulped fruit as well. So guessing that's what the other agave is bringing to the blend. It's got a really lovely depth to it. It's got a softness, a smoothness, and a roundness. It's kind of, you know, it's maybe slightly more commercial style than the Animas, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. And I think that's the thing, that to kind of get people, I suppose, into the category, you want not a kind of mezcal light, but if you kind of see where I'm coming from, you don't want something too weird and wacky that's too left field initially. You want something that's kind of, you know, a little bit more commercial, a little bit softer, a little bit more approachable maybe, and then once you've kind of done that, you can then sort of explore the slightly more weird and wonderful versions. And I do like this. I think it's got some real interest. Like I said, I think it's got an attraction, and like I said, it's got a really kind of new makey kind of whiskey kind of character. So I think sort of, you know, people that drink whiskey would certainly sort of feel, you know, relatively at home with this, I guess, assuming of course obviously you had the opportunity to taste new make whiskey, I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Quite rounded, rich, soft, smooth. Again, a nice combination of sweetness with just a suggestion of that sort of slight acetic kind of character. Nice peppery finish. All round, I think a sort of a really good, what I would say, entry level mezcal. And certainly I think if you're looking to taste a mezcal for the first time, maybe this would be the one you would go for. It is kind of quite, you know, approachable, and like I said, probably slightly more commercial in style than the previous ones. Like I said, that is not a derogatory comment whatsoever. You need these kind of different styles, and yeah, I don't think that's too bad at all. Right, okay, so we ain't in Oaxaca anymore, Toto. So this is the Zacatecas, which is made from the Tequila Blue Weber Agave. So let's see what the nose gives us on this. Completely different. I mean, this is more tequila-like, which I guess you would expect. It's got more pepperiness rather than a smokiness. It's got a softness, a pulped fruit character, slightly herbal. Again, we're looking sort of more kind of new make whiskey kind of character. It has that sort of that roundness and that fullness that you would you often get with new make whiskey, and that's lovely. It's got a lovely balance. Again, it's got a real minerality. I can't speak. Oh, it's getting to me. And yeah, it's got that lovely tequila-y pepperiness. And that is absolutely gorgeous. That is lovely. And like I said, I mean, it is more like a tequila than a mezcal. Certainly, it is very, very different from the other four that I've tasted so far. So yeah, really intriguing. Slight earthiness in the background. Lovely spirit. Really very, very good. Let's see what the palate's like. Clean, rounded, full. Again, very peppery. Very tequila-like, lovely pulped fruit, nice balance of sweetness and minerality, really peppery. I mean really peppery. I mean, that pepper is just kind of lingering. It's sort of almost kind of chili pepper now. Certainly it doesn't have the sort of black peppery kind of sweetness. It has a real kind of bite to it. Oh, that's really mouthfilling, really good. Really like that. That is impressive. And finally, we're on to the Durango. Like I said, this is again another different agave varietal. This is cenizo, which I believe means ash or something like that in Mexican, or something of that kind of ilk. But anyway, let's see what those give us. Oh. Really herbal, really green, slightly astringent, kind of cold tea, really unusual, really stinky as well. There's a real manuriness to this. I mean, talk about natural. It's got natural character by the bucketful. I like this. I mean, this kind of, I imagine if you like your Islers, if you like your peated malts, you know, this is going to really appeal to you, because it has that sort of, you know, stinkiness to it, and herbal, kind of real woody herbal kind of character. Oh, that's really intense, really something different, it has to be said. Let's see what the palate gives. Oh, that's really manure-y, sort of damp straw manure, pungent, intense, little sweetness on the finish. I'm getting a kind of a slight sort of pulped fruit sweetness on the finish. it's not particularly acetic, it's just really manure and stinky and kind of, you know, quite fun, it has to be said, but it is kind of, it's weird. You know, it is as far removed from commercial as you can possibly get, to be bluntly honest with you. Real left field kind of stuff, really mineral. Right on the very end of the aftertaste, there's a sort of like an almost kind of tequila-y sort of sweetness. I mean, this is a really complex spirit. I mean, this would be the sort of thing not for the uninitiated, shall we say. But, woo, yeah. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of the distributors, companies that have given samples for today's episode of the show. I think this has blown my mind, it has to be said, and not because I've been chewing on the bloody worm. So, the Medida Espadin, yeah, okay, pleasant, straightforward, simple, maybe a little too ascetic, possibly, for its own good, but certainly I don't think it's a bad spirit at all. The Tepeztate, yeah, a little bit more interest there, a little bit more going on. Maybe it's the combination of the two agaves that have given it a little bit more complexity. Maybe it's just the varieties of agave that have given it more complexity. I don't honestly know, but yeah, certainly an interesting mezcal, to say the least. The Animas Papalometi, I'm warm to that. I love the artisanal character of it. It feels really, really natural. Again, a nice balance. I think the Papalometi agave is obviously counteracting some of the astringent acetic characteristics of the Espadin, and it's just, to me, it had an absolutely lovely balance. Mezcal Union, yeah, again, I like that. I think that's a very good entry-level mezcal. It doesn't have too much of the weird characteristics. It's a little bit more commercial, and it's a sort of a pleasant mezcal, and certainly sort of, you know, a good entry-level mezcal, which is, I think, like with all spirits, I mean, yes, all right, so you look at whiskey and people do often have a tendency nowadays to jump straight in at the Islers, but sort of going back to sort of bygone days, it was sort of start with your Spays or your Highlands and then graduate up to it. And, you know, I think with mezcal, I think this is certainly sort of a case in point. You know, start with a slightly more commercial, slightly more approachable style, and then look at some of the more weird and wacky ones. The Zecatecas, I really like that. I mean, but then again, it seemed to be more like a tequila than a mezcal. Certainly from it stood out quite considerably in this particular tasting. And the Durango, well, damn, that was a weird one, it has to be said. I mean, you know, this left field was, you know, a very apt comment, I think. Really stinky, really manure, really natural. Great spirit, absolutely loved it to bits, and but it's not for the faint-hearted. You don't really want to start off on that. Or maybe you do, you know, maybe you're kind of got a slightly masochistic side and you want to start off with something weird and wonderful like that. Brilliant, go for the Durango. It's you know, really intense, really sort of natural. Anyway, so that's this week's episode of the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I honestly hope that if you've never thought of trying mezcal before, you will give it a try, and you know, just see. You know, it might not be your kind of thing. You know, you might not get into it, but I think it's got, as a style of spirit, it has so much interest. And I think from this particular tasting alone, and this is only a mere snapshot of the mezcals that are available on the market, there is such a variety of different characteristics, and you know, it like I said, it's sort of, I think, has more in common with rum than anything else. I mean, the fact that you've got the different base materials in rum, and it shares a sort of a commonality, I suppose, with the use of sugarcane juice. It's got that natural character. It's sort of, you know, taking the raw material and baking it in a hole in the ground and you know, literally just crunching the damn thing up, you know, and it has that kind of association with that, and I for one think it's a great spirit and very underappreciated, and like I said, forget all the kind of nonsense that goes on around it, and certainly, you know, don't get put off by the immense geekery. Just buy yourself a bottle and enjoy it. So until next week, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. It's something a little bit different to the usual, but I still think that deserves its place on the show. So until next week, good ramming and good afternoon.